Hello everybody, thank you. If everyone could resume their seats please. We'll move on and so I've got a wonderful lunchtime obligation, which is to participate in the reopening of the Kathmandu CBD. I guess you would call it their flagship store, and in fact I'm going to call it their global flagship store, because this is where they were born. So I get to go off and do that, and so Andrew will take over the chair. We'll deal with the Hagley Oval proposed amendments to the district plan. I'm hoping that we can deal with that relatively quickly now that we've made some adjustments. And then Andrew will take over the chair. We'll go on to the Victoria Street proposals, and then I'll come back and rejoin the meeting at 2 o'clock. So I doubt that we'll get much further than that before I come back. So the item is the Hagley Oval proposed amendments to the district plan, feedback to Regenerate Christchurch, and perhaps if staff could talk through some of the changes that have been proposed to the draft feedback to Regenerate Christchurch. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So following discussions from last week, we've made some changes, particularly in terms of the use of the Section 71 process from last week. And taken out certain aspects of that and made it neutral in terms of support or not supporting Section 71 of the Act. We are also looking, to make a further change to the one that you have in front of you, and that is taking out the last paragraph of in the section headed up use of the Section 71 process. We're looking to take that out, and staff at front there have that highlighted for you. So we're looking to delete that as well. So happy to take any questions, and I think we also provided a bit of a table, a matrix that talks you through the various headings and looks at what existing resource consent conditions are, what's being proposed, and what the council feedback is at a high level.
Okay, and Tim, you'd like to move the resolution with the removal of that paragraph, and seconded by Mike. Okay, questions? Phil.
Thank you for your work on this and the amendments. I want to ask you around the questions around your comments in the letter to Regenerate Christchurch about the major sports facility, and clearly there's huge implications if we if as a city this proceeds. So I'm just wondering what can council do if in fact Regenerate Christchurch proceed with this part of it?
Well, reflecting back that this is the draft proposal, and we're providing feedback on the draft proposal. So your question really is what happens if this is still included in the proposal that goes to the minister?
That's right.
Obviously, then we have the opportunity to comment at that point. I think the point we're making at this stage is that we don't believe that that is required to achieve the outcomes that they're seeking. We think that having that included, and David Faulkner is here with me, can expand on having that included goes well beyond what is expected to occur in Hagley Park. So two things: one, we don't think it's appropriate, and two, we don't think it prevents the outcome that's being sought if it's changed.
And thank you. And then if it was to proceed, there'd be enormous implications for us as a council.
Potentially it opens the door, but there are other decisions that would have to be made, obviously, but it does open the door, and I might let David talk to that.
Yeah, I suppose the reason why we've highlighted this is because major sports facility is defined in the district plan as a facility that can have grandstands and can have a level of buildings which is more than what sort of the village green aspect of Hagley Oval is providing. I mean, we don't dispute that it obviously is an international ground. We have international sport features there, but it's also in keeping with the village green kind of concept. So we're just saying that having that term there could anticipate that there could be more buildings there, and that's not what's been proposed here. If that's something that is considered in the future, that needs to be considered at a later date. It's not part of the proposal here.
And its own merits.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to raise that issue that was raised earlier around the car parking and the change that they have. Are we able to make a specific mention of that, given the constraints around the hospital area?
So in the letter that we've provided, we talk about I think it's management plans, and we talk to council requests. That management plans are approved by Christchurch Transport Operations Centre. So parking is picked up in that aspect. If you wanted to add something further, that would be the place to add it. But in effect, parking is something that is considered through the transport management plan process.
Yeah. I mean, I just think it is quite a major issue in this area, and it was raised earlier before. It is a huge issue in the absence of hospital car parking, and the extra days and stuff like that will cause extra pressure in this area. No, I'm just asking, do we think we should be putting something specific?
Yanni did raise this earlier.
That's what I mean, and it's something that I've picked up on as well.
Have we got the management right?
So I think I asked staff to come up with some additional wording following the conversation this morning. So I'm not sure if that addresses what you're looking for.
It does that, but I think there needs to be an acknowledgement that there are wider parking issues in the area. I mean, and there is potential for parking to, for solutions to be found, both in terms of the new Metro Sports facility. I think some of the constraints that might have existed under previous arrangements may not be so significant, she says with a smile. And of course the hospital itself will start to resolve that. Well, the
Yes.
Ministry of Health will start to resolve that most vexed issue, which is the parking dedicated for the hospital and for staff and visitors to the hospital. So I think maybe if you could just think of some additional words that start to reflect that.
So what I could do, if you approve this, and I could go away and put a couple of sentences under a heading of parking.
Yeah.
I think that would be.
Yeah, I think that'd be good.
If you're comfortable with me doing that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Vicky and Yanni.
Questions, I'm sorry. So what's being sought under the Section 71 change allows them to develop a major sports facility which would allow the development of a permanent stadium or grandstands as a permitted activity. Is that correct?
It wouldn't be a permitted activity as such, but it would. I suppose having those words in the plan gives the anticipation that
Yes.
that this is what the Hagley Oval is designed for. So it may make it easier
So
to
if this
make
went
that in the future.
through, then that would be allowed under this proposed plan change.
Not in the words that they've currently proposed. No.
So can I just be clear? So the urgency of this related to the Women's World Cricket and the new ICC rules or whatever they are, and the need for lighting. Why are all these other things included in this proposal? Do you know? Like, why is the proposal not limited to the actual thing that was required? Yeah,
The lights are just one aspect of lifting this facility to a different level. So there are a number of other matters that they're looking to address.
But the different level that's required for this event is just the lights?
That is one of the key matters holding them back, yes.
What else holds them back?
I mean, there might be an issue with the number of match days as well, depending on what are the other events in that calendar year, whether the World Cup triggers them over that.
So the 6 permanent lights and the number of match days. Why then do we have to be approving something that allows for the development of a permanent, or not opposing something, or not opposing strongly enough, something that allows for the development of a permanent stadium in that site, which people will have very definite views on and want to be heard about?
So we are opposing that.
Yeah, so that's why we put it in our feedback, that we are opposing that.
So just in relation to this proposal, the section 71, and the bit that's now been deleted from the letter, what actual public consultation will there be on something that people have a very strong emotional attachment to?
So under the Section 71 process, this will, if it is approved by council, by the minister, it will go out for public comment for a period decided by the minister. And in addition, as we've talked previously, there will be a process that would be required under the Reserves Act in terms of changing the lease. Thank you, and that would have a hearings process.
So can you just explain for us again, given when that will be held, that hearings process?
So I believe that in the previous meeting, Council passed a resolution to enable a hearings process should the Minister decide to proceed. So the process is very prescribed in the Act. Public notification needs to occur with quite specific information around what the application is for. It must be open for a minimum of 30 days, and all submitters or objectors have the right to be heard. So council will hold a hearing, and that has to be considered before council can make a decision on the lease, and that's specific only to the lighting component of this proposal.
So say, for example, the major sport activity, for example, but it was part of the proposal, but it wasn't part of that agreement at that time. Would that be considered at that time, or would that just sneak through?
So that aspect would be under the Section 71 process, which would be included in the period for public comment.
So in the letter that's attached today versus the letter, I liked the letter that we had last time. That seemed quite clear. That was, we don't like this process because of this, this and this, and because you've confused this, this and this. In that letter, I'm not sure what our view is. Can you just tell us very succinctly what our view is on this in that letter?
In terms of the process, in the Section 71
on
process...
whether a Section 71 is a good use, whether this is a good use for that, and whether it's sufficiently limited to the outcome that cricket are trying to achieve, or whether there's a whole pile of other things that come through the back door.
So in this letter we identify that there are other options available to achieve the outcomes that are being sought, but we acknowledge that those processes are not going to enable us to get to the position that's being sought in time for the Women's World Cup. So we acknowledge that that is a time constraint that is being worked, that is being considered with this proposal, and that the other options available wouldn't allow us to achieve the outcome in time for that event. So we are staying relatively agnostic on the use of the Section 71 process, acknowledging that to achieve what's wanted to be achieved in time for that particular event, then this Section 71 is probably the only process available.
Yes, so we've changed from being quite clearly opposed last time to now we're suddenly okay with this, and you can slip through a major stadium as well.
We are agnostic, and we identify the options available and which options you would use to achieve the outcomes being sought.
We did discuss a number of these issues last week. Sorry, who else did I have? Mike? Yanni?
Thank you. I can understand Vicky's concern, but I would assume if they were going to suddenly want to put a stadium in Hagley Oval, therefore would require a change to the lease agreements.
Yes.
And
that's what I was
have to
referring to earlier in terms of other decisions would need to be made, yes. That would only be in terms of the district plan. There are other...
Yeah, so they're not going to be able to sneak through a stadium in Hagley Oval if it gets approved through the Section 71.
No,
have it in there
not
then?
for a major sports facility, but what you are saying is that actually that definition isn't actually required to achieve the outcome they're wanting either.
So take it out.
Yeah, which is what we're suggesting.
Yanni?
I mean, it kind of worries me that it can get so far to this point and there can be such a huge discrepancy about what's needed in our district plan around having a major sports facility versus just having it as open space. Like, obviously, lots of money's been paid to professionals. We're funding Regenerate huge amounts of money. How can we have such a discrepancy between this?
So, Councillor, I'll just remind you that this is not my proposal, and that our task as a strategic partner is to provide feedback on this proposal, this draft proposal, sorry.
Yeah.
That's not really for me to comment on.
Sure.
I'm trying to ensure we provide as good a quality advice back to Regenerate Christchurch, so that when a proposal is developed, it is the best proposal that it can be, and it delivers the outcomes being sought and the best outcomes for the city.
Okay, thanks. It just seems kind of bizarre. We're funding we're funding our staff and we're funding Regen, and we're having this big, so we're just paying people to argue basically out of the ratepayer's pocket. But just in terms of the traffic, so I'm just trying to understand in terms of the district plan, the hospital is a designated site,
Yes.
and the Metro Sports Facility is a designated site. So there's no requirements in terms of car parking that those facilities have. And now we're talking about removing any requirement for car parking as part of the Hagley Oval development in terms of, the proposal was to remove any requirement around car parking as part of this change. So how can what mechanisms do we have to recognise the impact of car parking in this area on the hospital and on other people that want to use Hagley Park when there's events on?
Yeah, so across the entire central city, there is no requirement to provide parking in the district plan, and that was put in place by the recovery plan. So I suppose, this really formalises the situation that has occurred over the last few years, with since parking on the Hagley Park itself has not been allowed, and so that rule that was in the consent wasn't able to be implemented because we didn't allow parking on the Hagley Park. The parking issues will have to be dealt with through the management plan, and also there's obviously lots of discussions at the moment going on about parking for the hospital, parking for Metro Sports, and parking for Hagley Oval will be part of those discussions as well. So it's going to have to be dealt with outside of the district plan.
Right. But do we have any sense of the impact if the number of event days are increased to what's being proposed, not what we've put feedback on, but if that goes ahead, then do we have any impact around the loss of parking to the general public as part of the traffic management plan or the events management plan?
So, this is somewhat anecdotal, but the way that the traffic management plans have been set up for international events that are currently hosted at Hagley Oval, the public parking that is available now on the streets remains available. The parking that gets excluded as a consequence of having an event in Hagley Park are the two car parks that are adjacent to Hagley Oval on Riccarton Ave and what was the horticultural, now the cricket centre. Now, it's important to note that those parks are technically, car parks are technically supposed to only be available for users of the park. Now, we know every day that that's not the case. They are used by members of the public to visit and or work at the hospital. So the impact, I would argue, is somewhat minor, given that we already host numerous international events. The traffic management plans seem to be working quite efficiently and quite well. I'm not aware of any public anxiety around those events. So if the number of events goes up by 2 or 3 a year, that's really the consideration that you need to be mindful of with regard to that particular aspect.
Right. So when I've seen, you know, the event days, they obviously have a large number of equipment that goes into those car parks as well.
Into the Hagley Park car parks?
Yeah, yeah. And
yes, which are not technically there to support the hospital.
No, I understand that. But if you increase the number of events and the event days and the peripheral timing around that, which we can see here, you know, plus 5 days either side of construction, deconstruction, 60 event days per year, plus extra 15, those car parks are going to be out of action for a lot longer than what they could currently be.
Not with the peripheral activity. That activity occurs primarily within the oval. The car parks are still available. And depending on the size of the event, sometimes some of the car park is removed, some of it remains.
Right. So, I mean, I would have thought if these proposals go ahead and with all the other improvements to Hagley Oval, we will see an increase in people wanting to go there, which will have an impact on the traffic. So, you know, I think you need to be...
Overall, yes, not on the particular day, you're just repeating it more often.
Yeah, but I think we do need to be stronger in terms of our feedback around the traffic. And, you know, it needs to be a real concern, and we need to have confidence that we're not exacerbating the problems for people that want to attend the hospital.
Remembering that the application is to remove the requirement to park on Hagley Park, not to resolve the car parking issues in the surrounding area.
But won't that just mean that if they don't have that option of parking on Hagley Park, that they end up putting it somewhere else in the vicinity?
We can make a decision, if you wish, to allow them to continue to park on Hagley Park. That's the option.
Just a final question from me is, I'm trying to understand just the public funding around this. So, you know, when this was first agreed, we had concerns around the business case and the public funding. We did get a 2013 memo back, but my understanding is since then there's been quite a huge public investment in associated facilities to the Oval. Do we have any sense of the total quantum that we've spent as a council on this facility since it's been built?
In terms of total investment, are you talking capital investment only? Are you talking about our operational expenditure? There's quite a lot of detail that I would have to dig up to answer that question, sorry.
Could we actually ask the relevance? I mean, you know,
Yeah.
it's really
I'm not
important
quite
that questions are
understanding why that's
focused
relevant.
Because if
on
you've put in a
relevant.
huge amount of public investment...
I'm not going to require you to answer it. I mean, you know, I think I've been relatively patient in this regard, but I think it's important that we focus on the issue in front of us, which is the feedback that we will be giving to Regenerate Christchurch in terms of their Section 71 proposal. Tim.
Thank you. Now, look, I'm quite happy with the removal of the major sports facility wording because of the concerns. But with regards to that, and we've heard and it is a motive to a degree about the possibility of a stadia, etc. We've got we're looking at the multi-use arena at the moment. It's close to $500 million project with a lot of talk about it. But has anyone, apart from ourselves, mentioned the word stadium? Have Regenerate mentioned the building of a stadium or the Canterbury Cricket?
Oh, look, I think, you know, and it's quite well laid out what that proposed change would allow for. It's not necessarily all of a sudden you're going to see a stadium. It's more about what it allows in terms of incremental development that could occur over time. That's the door that gets wedged open.
That's fine, and I'm more than happy for that to be removed. But the second question, when council decided, and quite rightly, to remove parking from Hagley Park for the other events such as Classical Sparks, etc., could we look at the same concerns perhaps that Councillor Hanson's brought up with regards to effects on the surrounding areas with parking?
Not to my knowledge. Actually, to my knowledge, and the Mayor may remember, I actually exercised a delegation that I have as Head of Parks.
Yep.
It was a decision made around the impact of parking on the sports facilities,
Yep.
the community sports aspect of the park. Wasn't the most popular decision I've ever made in my life, but as it turns out, the city seems to have adapted to this incredibly well and are using public transport, they're using scooters now and other means to attend most events in the park.
Yep. So, and the recovery of the sports, I mean, you can see it in itself anyway, can't you? That it's actually really improved those sports fields.
Yes.
Yeah, cool. Which was obviously the outcome we wanted.
Yes.
Phil?
Thank you. One other question I have is in relation to the lights, and I just see in our letter that in fact there's clearly potential or possibilities through our lighting design study you refer to, that the height of the poles could be potentially reduced. So I'm just wondering if you could comment on the potential of that, but particularly in terms of, for example, that being able to be achieved through negotiation.
So that's a, David will probably help me out here, but that's an initial conversation we've had with a lighting expert. When the proposal came in, it came in at the higher figure, and we've provided some initial feedback to Regenerate Christchurch in terms of the advice that we've received that may actually be able to drop them down. Which would be, I think, a really good outcome if that's possible. So we'd need to do some more work in that regard, but that was just the initial advice we'd had from our own lighting expert.
So that discussion could be taken further with...
Oh, absolutely. We are now. Yeah,
Yeah.
we're in those conversations now with Regenerate Christchurch.
Thanks, Dave.
Vicky?
Sorry, just one further question on process. On page 8, you talk about we would appreciate ongoing discussion with the proposed rule changes so that they can be considered, and we would appreciate a further chance to comment on the finalised set of proposed rules, especially as there's no opportunity to change them under section 71. How does that process work in terms of the council as a whole?
So that would be council officers working with Regenerate Christchurch staff and the consultants that have been engaged to come up with a suite of rules that we think will deliver the best outcomes. It was not something that I would envisage would come back for a decision of council. It would be a technical matter at an officer level, and then that would be seen in the proposal that is put forward by Regenerate Christchurch to the Minister.
So no councillor involvement in that at all?
That is to assist them to develop their proposal that they then put to the Minister, and then once that proposal is put to the Minister, that is when you have the opportunity for public comment, and that is when there would be the opportunity for council to make that comment.
In terms of the public comment that comes back to the Minister, is that just a written comment? There's no sitting down actually discussing or talking about it, or nothing like a hearings panel or anything?
No, that's right. So
you just write your views and post them?
In the Act, it talks about written comment. I'm struggling to remember off the top of my head, but written comment. We have thought in terms of, is that a minimum or a maximum situation? So that is effectively what the Minister is required to do. The Minister, of course, could make a decision to do something different, but we're not the decision maker there.
So if this goes through, then the Minister could just go out for 2 weeks for written public comment, not actually have to listen to any of those people, and then that's it. And then under this change, there's an ability to build a major sports facility in Hagley Park.
If the major sports facility rules were retained, which I'd be surprised, but if they were, then that's what would effectively go into the district plan, if you like, if that was approved by the Minister. But as Councillor Davidson's raised earlier, there will be other decisions. As council is the owner of the park, there would be other decisions for council to make in terms of what happens to that facility.
And taking out that paragraph that allows for Regen to, in fact, create some consultation?
Yeah, I don't think on reflection that to achieve the outcome being sought through this mechanism in the time required, that it's the best way. Requiring them to do something before the development of a proposal is going to be useful for them to meet the timeframes that they're looking to meet. So we would look at the period where the Minister puts this out for comment.
If I might just offer something, I mean, the question of urgency and the use of the Section 71 of the Act is really around one matter, the lights. So if council wish to strengthen the feedback in relation to whether or not Section 71 is appropriate for some of those other matters, we could make sure the feedback isolates. In particular, that one staff have indicated that we strongly disagree, with that going ahead, cautioning that we need to, potentially be mindful of ensuring if the Minister does want to proceed with Section 71 in relation to the lights, that is the most appropriate avenue to achieve the goal, if that's the desire, for the Women's Cricket World Cup, for that one matter. Of which, really, from a park manager's operator's perspective, the only one that causes me, as the head of parks concerned, is the major sports facility consideration. The other ones have been somewhat utilised softly and are proving to be generate betterment for the park and management of the park.
Is there any chance of adding to the resolution some sort of, because we're taking out the reference to community engagement, but for Regenerate Christchurch to perhaps provide updates back to the council, so that at least there's a kind of a tracking and a line of sight on.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, I just think that might help alleviate some of the concerns that people are expressing.
Yes.
I mean, I felt that I was hearing you say that there's a degree of confidence that Regenerate Christchurch will take on board the feedback in relation to the major sporting facility proposal.
We continue to work with them, and they are receptive to what we're saying.
They're receptive.
It's obviously the Minister will make the final decision.
I mean,
yes, I understand that, but it would be better.
They're listening to us.
It would be better that they put forward a proposal that didn't include those words.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because the objectives that have been spelt out pretty clearly by the Cricket Association would all be met, but without those words being added.
Yeah. That's our point.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I guess my only reluctance is I can't speak for them.
No, but if we had a kind of an engagement or a reporting back mechanism, then at least we would feel that there was some comfort that was actually happening.
Yes.
Glenn.
Thank you. How long has the possibility of a bid been in the wings for the World Cup? Because it appears now there's this rush.
Well, it's been known about for some years that the Women's World Cup is coming to New Zealand. Right. I'm reluctant to speak on behalf of the trust, because I simply cannot do that.
Right.
But it had. I mean, that was in the press some years ago.
Okay, and obviously now it's intertwined with the lights, which is together are the drivers behind the process we're now going down.
To get the level of games that are being sought. I mean,
games, but these are guidelines, aren't they, for the lights?
I think we need to be mindful too that the conditions of tendering for the matches aren't put out when New Zealand wins the bid. There's quite an evolution of process over the years of how the event's actually going to operate.
Okay, so
what I'm suggesting is that you shouldn't assume that because we knew in 2013 that the event was going to be in New Zealand, the process should have begun then.
Okay, yeah, I get it. Too hard to second guess, including on the lights. The understanding at first was that the lights were an ICC, had a technical requirement sitting behind them, but now they're guidelines rather than specific.
I'm not sure, not quite sure what your question really means, but what I can say is that the specifications for lighting for broadcasting change as time evolves.
Okay. The question is about the lights being one of the drivers behind this process too, in terms of...
Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
But it seems like they're shifting.
There's standards?
No, yes.
Yes, they do. They change year on year.
Okay.
So when you're bidding, you have to meet the current standard, just like a building consent or any other consenting type process.
Yep, okay.
All right, Yanni?
I just wanted to check, when we knew that Canterbury Cricket wanted to change the car parking proposals or conditions of the consent.
Well, that just came in the proposal, in the draft proposal.
Right, because my understanding is in 2015, there was an attempt to change the resource consent.
I don't know, sorry. Right. And I'm not sure how relevant that is.
Well, it's whether we use normal processes to do it. So I get about the lights in terms of section 71. I think what I'm struggling with is the other changes that have been raised.
This is for us to provide feedback to a section 71 proposal. That's it.
That's right.
Yeah, we're just constantly getting questions which are not relevant.
Well,
and it's just no.
Except our previous advice was that the use of section 71 wasn't something that we thought was suitable.
Well, that's
that was staff.
Understand the process.
I do understand the process very well.
So I'm not sure that that is relevant to providing the feedback on the draft proposal.
Thank you.
Just check then the other question which I've raised, which I'm still a little bit unclear about. My understanding is the current consent governs the use of the pavilion, and the pavilion was built with funds from, I think, the Canterbury Earthquake Appeal Trust. And I just want to ensure, because this is part of a discussion that we've had over many years, that the pavilion can be used for the purposes of which it was funded, because it seems to me it's quite limiting in terms of recreation at the moment. And obviously we've been through that previously around the legal advice on that. So if we've got the pavilion there and it's an asset, is there anything that's been done to try and change the purpose for which the pavilion can be used to enable it to be used more?
No. There's nothing in the proposal about the pavilion, so there's no change.
Well, that's entirely up to the trust, and they haven't sought a change.
You okay with that amendment?
Right. So, I mean, it just seems crazy to me. You've got a facility there that's limited about what it can be used for. It was built for a certain purpose, but it can't...
Again, I think that's outside of what we're being asked to provide feedback on.
All right, so I've got a mover and seconder. Now, Vicky's added some additional wording, but I can treat it as an amendment, or if the mover and seconder have some comfort with it, then we can just simply include it in the body of the resolution. It reads, strengthen the feedback on the requirements for section 71 urgency. Urgency is not a requirement of the Act. Yes, requirements for section 71, everyone knows what that means, to relate only to the specific provisions required for this event and not allow a range of other things such as the change in the district plan to allow a major sports facility in Hagley Park. Well, I mean, if it shifts to permanent lighting, then it's not just for the specific event. You wouldn't have to dismantle it.
No, I understand what's required for this event. Suddenly there's a whole pile of other things that just have come under the door.
Just for clarity, we're not, and you'll see particularly from the matrix we've provided here with what we're proposing, the feedback we're proposing, we're not particularly concerned with a number of the other changes. So
right.
just so you're aware.
So, I mean, I'm just worried. I'm looking at these words and I don't know what they necessarily might mean. Is it possible to simply say that strengthen the feedback strengthen the feedback on our opposition to the what's the word? Is it the inclusion of a definition of major sports facility in the district plan, or I don't know what. I know the feedback's strong, but okay, we'll deal with it as an amendment. Leave the wording as it was. Take it out. Put an amendment. Take a seconder.
Could I make a suggestion for point number 4, Vicky?
Mm-hmm.
If it was specifically, because this is the concern, although it's only council that's mentioned the word stadium, but if it were specifically for major sports facility, as in the removal of that from the letter, or to strengthen our position, then. But for the rest of them, they've been issues for some time. So.
Okay, how about then strengthen the report feedback on the requirements for Section 71 to relate only to the specific provisions required for this event and not allow a change in the district plan to allow a major sports facility in Hagley Park. People want to have an input in that, not suddenly have it pushed in.
But we need a definition because
well, it's defined in the chart. It's defined in the chart that.
Could you argue that it is with the lights and Tier 1 matches that it is a major sports facility?
No,
Technical information in
Okay, well then
the point is that
put it up as an amendment.
yeah, okay, we'll put it up as an
Yep.
amendment. So moved by Vicky, seconded by Phil. All right. So
Can I just clarify? Because there's kind of two parts to that, to number 4 now, or the amendment. One of them is about the major sports facility, and I agree with that. But I'm kind of happy with the rest of the changes because I'm quite keen to get rid of the parking and stuff.
So I haven't included that.
Oh well, you said because if it's only the lights, then actually the parking wouldn't be included in what you've included.
But staff have just said they don't have a problem with some of the other things. So
No,
here we are
I've made
debating
it very
something that doesn't need
specific.
I
debate.
just think that
It relates to the major sports facility.
Yeah.
Oh no, but it's just got only to the specific provisions required for this event, which
for
would be
this
the
event.
So if we could take those
think
bits out because
it's too
that's
broad.
just the lights.
I was trying to find us in that happy space where we could actually just
So if we strengthen the
resolve this,
feedback.
which is strengthen the feedback on our opposition to the
Change in the district plan to allow a major sports facility.
Yep.
So cut out the bits that say relate only to specific provisions.
because
That would be cool
it's actually, and then put quote marks around major sports facility because it has a specific meaning under the district plan. Yes, right. Okay, so we can now include that in the resolution itself. It's just around the use of and quote marks major sports facility in Hagley Park.
I'd be all right with that.
Well, I just struggle to see how we can make the feedback any stronger than what it
it
currently
is strong, but you know, if people want to include this, is it going to break anyone's back that we just ask that it be stronger? You could make it stronger, couldn't you?
Very in front of.
We're very unhappy.
Very.
Okay, I'll open it up for debate and hand the meeting over to Andrew. Would anyone like to start?
Well, I'll reserve the right to finish.
Okay.
too. You can do both. No,
He doesn't want to.
I think there's debate.
Or not?
I don't think there's
Was there any debate? Okay, so is there debate? Yanni?
Thank you. I appreciate the work that staff have done on this, and I think the telling point in the council staff feedback is that council would like to note that providing comments on such a detailed and complex set of rule changes within the tight time frame has been particularly difficult. And if you go back and see that there's been attempts to change this consent since 2015, and I understand the reason behind some of those changes. They do seem quite logical to go through a normal process. The Section 71, in my view, should be used only where there's a need for it, and that is around the lights. The other stuff seems like it was well known to us previously. It could have gone through the normal process that would enable the public to have a normal say rather than a rushed and expedited process. It's really clear that the community will want to have a say on this. This is Hagley Park, And I think we should be open and transparent with our community as much as possible to enable them to participate in this discussion. I'm open-minded to what the outcome is, but I'd like to hear the views from our community. I think the second point I want to make is that I totally disagree with non-elected members being asked to make decisions around Hagley Park. This is a matter that should come back in front of the full council when we can hear the community views. We're elected to make decisions, and I believe it's entirely appropriate that we do so. I do not feel comfortable with delegating away from the elected members, even if it's just after an election. It should be up to the elected members to represent their communities and to listen to the views that have been expressed. I do not believe we should delegate that to non-elected members. And the final point I want to make is that we have a facility in the pavilion that we know has been challenged previously around the ability for it to be used for non-recreational uses. But what I can't understand is why you would spend and invest, and I know you wanted to rule it, out of order, but why would we invest millions and millions of dollars as a city and as funding agencies into a facility like the pavilion that we then place these restrictions on that it can only be used for sport and recreation? If it's sitting there and it's empty, why not use it for other things that the community feel are important? Why not give more people the opportunity to come and enjoy it, given that a lot of it was paid for with public funds or from charitable organisations, to enable the community to use it? I think after, as I understand it, March 15th, it was made available to a number of people in the community to use, and I totally support that. As much as I was concerned about it originally being put in where it was and the process around it, the fact is it's there, so not making the most of your investment seems totally crazy to me. So it's a real shame that that issue isn't being addressed through this process if all those other things are going to be done. And finally, I think we do need to be mindful of the car parking. People that are going to the hospital are struggling, and we cannot keep making parking decisions in isolation. There needs to be a coordinated planning approach for parking in this area.
Phil.
Thank you. And I certainly also want to thank the staff for a lot of work on this to get this right. I think the original proposal by Regenerate Christchurch actually has a lot lacking. And there's information, for example, having the major sports facility also being proposed is clearly unacceptable. And I think they need to get that message, and I hope the Minister does too. I want to support Christchurch having the Women's World Cup come. And there'll be, clearly significant benefit to the city. Alongside that, in terms of the proposal, there's huge public interest though as well. One, certainly in having future games of cricket, both at national and international level at the Hagley Oval. Alongside that though, there's huge public interest as well in making sure that in fact Hagley Park remains a reserve with sufficient open space. And I think that I'm very glad we've we've strengthened our feedback, because I think that the proposal, for example, around it being potentially being a major sports facility just pushes the envelope far too far. The staff have referred, and I think it's been put very well, to the Hagley Oval area and Hagley Park being part of like a village green, and that whole concept has worked very well. People enjoy the Oval. So I think though with the way this proposal is read, there has been a real risk of, by using the district plan, to have some what's been called incremental development, and that needs to stop. We know that in many ways that can end up being like development by creep. And I think to the people of Christchurch, that would not be acceptable. So I think we have to continue to make these comments to Regenerate, so that in fact we end up with a very sensible use of Hagley Oval. And on that basis, I'm certainly happy to support it.
Thank you. David.
Thank you. Look, I'm very supportive of the Hagley Oval, and I see that this Section 71 proposal is primarily wrapped around the need for lighting for the Women's World Cup coming up. So in that respect, I totally support the the use of the Section 71 to see that this provision gets through relatively easily. Hagley Oval has been a jewel in the crown for Christchurch since its development, and in fact is now recognised probably as the preeminent cricket facility for New Zealand. The lighting obviously is essential. Without it, there will be no games in the South Island, regardless of the World Cup or not. So the Section 71 process, yes, it does address the lighting proposal, and I'm very supportive of that. However, as other speakers have noted, there have been some quite restrictive provisions placed around the original consent for the Oval, and I think it's timely to improve upon one or two of those. The pack-in and pack-out provisions have been onerous. The removal of TV broadcasting facilities, to name a few. I think, you know, that perhaps going forward there are and will be a need for other matters to be addressed, and perhaps the best way for some of those to be addressed is via a standard RMA process. But certainly I believe we need to bring Hagley Oval up to a standard where there's not the restrictive sort of imposition on playing cricket on the Oval, and B, as Councillor Johansson has mentioned earlier, the restriction on the use of the pavilion and other facilities is absurd, and we should be making the greatest value of that building for the city going forward. So I'm going to support option 1. I have some reservations about option 2, but I do note that there may be a provision or a need, I should say, to convene a hearing before Christmas, and practicality may dictate that there are no elected members to fulfil that role, but I'm sure that every cognizance will be given to ensuring that appropriately qualified people do fit into that. So with some reservations, yes, I will support it, and 3, but I do have some, I won't vote for option 4.
Mike.
Thanks. I think as a city we're fortunate to actually have bespoke legislation that enables regeneration because of the earthquakes. And it's pretty straightforward actually. Before the earthquakes we had a facility that could host international day-night cricket matches. And we actually have an opportunity now to host top cricket matches in the upcoming Women's World Cup. And we've got the legislation that will actually enable it. And we also know at the same time there'll be a parallel process through the council that will allow public submissions. In the letter, it clearly states a lot of technical information and our concerns, including strongly imposing the term major sports facility. And if it makes people happier to put the word very strongly opposes, I'm fine with that too. I think we've got a really good opportunity here, and I'm surprised it's taken this long to actually get to this conclusion.
So Tim, I'll come back to you at the end. Oh, Anne.
Just, I totally agree with Mike there. I mean, it's particularly important, I think, to note that this is a women's World Cup that we're thinking about, and I think we really want to strengthen women's sport in the country, in the city. I think it's a wonderful opportunity. So if these changes allow us to do that, then I'm all for them. I feel very comfortable that the things, the conditions that we put around these will protect this beautiful part of our city, but I also think that it will enable that resource to be used in a far more beneficial way and really capitalise on it. So I'll be supporting all of these.
This isn't too different than a lot of decisions that get made, and finding the balance between competing interests is a big part of what we end up doing quite often. Do I want the Women's Cricket World Cup to have these matches in Christchurch? Yes, of course I do. Do I understand that Hagley Park has got a very special place in the hearts of the people of the city, and that there's a level of development which wouldn't be supported by residents? Yes, of course I understand that. But for once, this isn't our decision. All we're doing today is providing feedback on a draft proposal so that others can make the decisions that need to be made. Having said that, I'm a lot happier with the feedback that we've got in front of us this week than I was with what came in front of us last week, and I'd like to acknowledge the work that's been done on that in the meantime. I think this is balanced. It calls out those areas where we've got concerns. And we've avoided the binary situation of de facto making the decision which isn't ours to make. So I'm supportive of what's in front of us. On specific matters, as regards paragraph 2, I would expect that staff will do everything they can, having heard the feedback that they've heard, to avoid a situation where a hearings panel would be made up of non-elected members, given that there would be a very short period when there would be no elected members available. Once we get beyond the swearing in, which generally happens a couple of weeks after the election, I'm sure, given what we've heard, there will be elected members who will be very happy to put themselves forward to be part of a hearings panel. So if we can encourage, whilst that needs to be there because there's a need for speed, depending what happens, if we can encourage a situation where elected members are able to be part of this, if at all possible, I think that would reflect what we've heard this morning, or this afternoon as it now is, and kind of echoing Mike's comments on paragraph 4, I think the feedback's pretty strong already, but we're again sending a signal that we are particularly supportive of that strong feedback, and if it can be strengthened, then great. So Tim, I'll come to you to close the debate, and then we'll vote on this.
Thank you, Andrew. Look, first of all, wondering about transparency and opency. This is a public meeting which is being live streamed, so I think it is actually quite open to the public, so that's kind of, for me, answers that. The removal of the term major sports facility, although we are the only ones that seem to have a concern over a stadia type thing, I do totally agree with staff about the issue of creep, and I think that is absolutely crucial, because we cannot forget why Hagley Oval is considered one of the most beautiful cricket venues in the world, and that is because it's green and it seems to be more relaxed than many of the others, surrounded by large buildings and concrete. So I am totally in support with the council staff with regards to the removal of the major sports facility, or that term. Traffic planning, council and the ratepayers of Christchurch weren't the ones that chose not to build a car park attached to the hospital. That was central government. That was not us. If they were really onto it and they were really future planning, they would have put a chopper pad on the roof, they would have ample parking with extra disabled parking and good access for elderly, and they would have probably put in a creche as well, but they chose not to. So the ratepayers of Christchurch are the ones that have got to pick up this mess. With regards to parking, if you go along the Hagley area, and that area specifically, our parks manager is right, it is seldom that you will find a park anywhere in that area. So whether you are holding, by the time you're going to go to an event, the parks are well and truly gone by either staff or visitors at the hospital. And for my mind, quite rightly too, because you've got to do what you've got to do. So there are a number of things that event managers can do, which is park and ride, etc., which our own staff do for a number of events. So there are things that we can take on board. And I do commend again our parks manager when he decided to take and remove parking from North Hagley Park events. And I was met with a group of event managers, as I did it myself, and I basically told them that they'd lost it because of their slack management of their parking, which was the concern that started that ball rolling. And I think that our North Hagley Park is better off for the removal of those parks. So I don't have an issue with that. The lighting, we don't actually know what the finished requirements are for ICC. So when the Canterbury Cricket Trust and New Zealand Cricket know this, then that will be what comes back to Council for discussion. It may well trigger the lease agreement, and that would then go into some kind of consultation process, and then let's cross that when we do. But my word of caution there is, let's look at what could be in the future, because in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, what will be the changes in this media, and we just don't know. So it's a ball of many strings, unfortunately. With regards to the number of issues in this venue, you can't build a new venue, which we have done in 2013, and then expect it to be perfect. You don't get that with swimming pools, you don't get that with any venue or facility. So the changes that are required or mentioned have been an issue for some time and have to be dealt with sensitively. So I don't have a problem with that, but it does have to be done in the right way. A lot of people want to use that venue for many, many things, and they are hampered with regards to the resource consent, and that is something separately that I think we should look at to make it more available to the ratepayers and residents of Christchurch to use as they see fit, apart from sporting events. Well, I hopped in a cab years ago in New York, and I was sitting in this cab, and the driver said, "Oh, you're from New Zealand?" I said, "Yeah." And he goes, "Wow, I've been watching the cricket." First of all, I was actually stumped that an American was watching cricket, but he said that it was the most beautiful venue that he has ever seen in a cricket match. And so here you are, the odds of me getting that cabbie in New York who watched cricket is absolutely, the odds are amazing. But what the key there is, Hagley Park Oval is a jewel in our crown and should be looked at as so. So if we can use it more often and sensitively for the likes of the Women's World Cricket or anything, but it's done sensibly and with respect to the venue and the ratepayers of Christchurch, I think that that is a positive. So I will totally be supporting this, and I'm glad that I've moved it. Thank you.
So I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those against? So there are votes against from... Can those voting against just raise their hands, please?
Is this for or for the whole?
Yeah. Can you just clarify?
Oh, hang on.
Some separate or...
Right.
So we're voting on 4, 1, 2, 3.
Remember, I took over the chair partway through. What are we putting separately?
Well, I want my vote recorded against 2.
All right. So we're putting 2 separately, we're putting 4 separately, and then we're putting the remainder.
So is this 1 and 3?
All right. So let's go back. So let's put paragraph 2, resolution 2, on its own first. So all those in favour of resolution 2, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Against?
No. Just have my vote.
So Yanni and Raf against 2, and Pauline against 2, and Vicky against 2. And then resolution 4, all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against?
No.
So those who are against, can you just raise your hands so that we can... So that's Raf, David East and James Goff against. And then the balance, all those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Against? No. Raf against? That's carried. All right, thank you. And